Las Vegas, 1974.
20,000 fans were screaming for Elvis to start the show, but he stood frozen under the spotlight, staring into the crowd. He refused to sing a single note until one woman walked in. When she finally did, what happened next made an entire arena go silent. April 10, 1974, Las Vegas Hilton showroom. Every table was filled. Sequin dresses shimmered under the stage lights. The smell of hairspray, bourbon, and velvet curtains hung in the air. More than 20,000 fans waited for the king to walk out. The orchestra was ready. The drummer tapped his sticks. The lights dimmed as the familiar intro of Also Sprach Zarathustra shook the walls. Cameras flashed, but Elvis didn't appear. Seconds turned to minutes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People craned their necks, whispering, "Is he sick? Did something happen?" Backstage, Charlie Hodge, his longtime friend and rhythm guitarist, looked toward the curtain. "Boss," he said softly, "they're getting restless." Elvis sat in silence, head bowed, his white jumpsuit glinting faintly under the dressing room lights. His microphone rested in his lap. The show should have started 5 minutes ago, but his eyes were locked on the security monitor showing the entrance tunnel to the arena. "She's not here yet," he muttered. Charlie blinked. "Who?" Elvis didn't look up. "You know who." On stage, the crowd began clapping in rhythm, trying to call him out. The sound echoed like a heartbeat. Every second that passed built the tension higher. He finally stood, adjusted his belt, and walked to the curtain. But when the stagehand pulled it back, Elvis shook his head. "Not yet." He turned away. The band stared, unsure whether to keep waiting or start without him. The conductor lifted his hands halfway, then froze. Nobody wanted to move. Even the air felt heavier. Out front, a young couple whispered, "He never does this." Another fan fanned herself, trying to hide her nervous excitement. The Hilton crowd wasn't used to seeing Elvis hesitate. In the control booth, the sound technician lowered the volume to a hum. The show clock read 8:17 p.m., 7 minutes late. Then 8, then 9. Charlie tried again. "Boss, what do you want me to tell him?" Elvis picked up the mic, clicked it on, and said quietly, "Tell him the truth. Tell him I'm waiting for someone." When Charlie relayed that to the manager, the man laughed in disbelief. "He's what?" But one look at Elvis's face through the curtain killed the argument. Elvis wasn't joking. His jaw was tight, his eyes tired but alive. He whispered, "She said she might come tonight." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Only a few knew who she was, the woman who still haunted his songs, even after the papers declared them finished. Out in the arena, the impatience turned into confusion, then silence. 20,000 people holding their breath. Elvis stood backstage, still as stone, listening to that silence. The kind of silence that could crush a man or remind him what mattered most. Finally, he said it again, barely audible. "She's not here yet," and the crowd waited with him, not knowing their idol was waiting for the ghost of his own past. What kind of love makes a man stop the music? And what would you have done if you were him? That afternoon, hours before the show, a cream-colored envelope arrived at the Hilton front desk. The receptionist, not recognizing the handwriting, passed it to Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager. He carried it upstairs to Suite 3000, where Elvis was resting in his robe, watching reruns of Hawaii Five-0 with the sound low. Joe handed it over. "This came special delivery from Beverly Hills." Elvis turned the envelope over in his hands. It wasn't from a fan, too personal, too careful. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single folded note, written in familiar cursive. "I'll be in the audience tonight. You'll know where to find me." It was signed with one word, Priscilla. Elvis went quiet. The TV's glow flickered over his face. Joe pretended not to notice the shake in his hand. For years, everyone in his circle avoided saying her name. It was a rule no one wrote down, but everyone followed. But that night, she broke it. Elvis set the note on the table and stood. "She's coming." Joe frowned. You sure that's real? Maybe a fan playing games. Elvis smiled sadly. I'd know that handwriting anywhere. He walked to the mirror, studying his reflection. His hair perfect, his collar high, his eyes tired. He touched the note again like it might disappear. For the rest of the day, he moved slower than usual. Between sound checks and costume fittings, his mind wasn't in the room. Charlie Hodge noticed it, too. You all right, E? Elvis looked up from tuning his guitar. She's gonna be there tonight. Charlie sighed. You think that's good? Elvis didn't answer. He just kept strumming. The same 3 chords of Always on My Mind. By evening, word had quietly spread backstage. Some of the band whispered that maybe Priscilla was already in the audience. Others said she wouldn't dare. But when the doors opened at 7 o'clock, security checked every VIP pass, every seat near the front. No sign of her. At 8:10 p.m., Elvis peeked at the entrance monitor again. Nothing. He paced the hallway in full costume, cape trailing, mic in hand. She said she'd be here, he murmured. The promoter urged him to start. Elvis, please, the crowd's waiting. We can't hold them off much longer. But Elvis didn't care about the clock. For once, the man who lived by applause was waiting for something money couldn't buy. I'll start when she's here, he said firmly. That's when Charlie looked up from his radio headset. Boss, I think we just got word. Elvis froze. Security says she's pulling up now. Front entrance. Elvis turned to the mirror one last time. He straightened his collar, ran a hand through his hair, and whispered, All right then. He walked toward the stage stairs as the crowd began chanting his name. Elvis! Elvis! The sound thundered through the walls like waves. The spotlight flicked on. The band took their positions again. And somewhere near the balcony doors, a woman in white stepped through the entrance. He hadn't even seen her yet, but somehow he felt it. The king of rock and roll smiled for the first time that night. What kind of love survives distance, silence, and time? And when it finally walks back through the door, how do you face it? The house lights dimmed again. The orchestra straightened in their seats. Fans began screaming, assuming Elvis was finally ready. But backstage, he wasn't moving, he was listening. Through the muffled roar, he caught the sound of footsteps echoing up the velvet-lined stairs that led to the balcony entrance. A hush fell over the first few rows as heads turned. Cameras flashed. The woman in white had arrived. Priscilla Presley, graceful, quiet, wearing a soft silk coat that shimmered under the golden light. She took her seat near the back, beside an older couple who didn't recognize her at first. But when they did, you could feel the air shift. Every fan near that row whispered her name like it was forbidden. Backstage, a stagehand ran to Elvis. She's here. For a split second, he didn't breathe. Then he nodded once, grabbed his microphone and said calmly, Now we can begin. He stepped out into the blinding spotlight. The crowd erupted, 20,000 people screaming, clapping, rising to their feet. Cameras went wild. Flash after flash lit up his white jumpsuit, catching on the rhinestones like stars exploding. But Elvis wasn't looking at them. His eyes were locked on one seat in the balcony. The noise around him became distant, almost hollow. He raised the mic to his lips. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The crowd cheered louder. This one's for someone very special. The orchestra struck the first notes of Always on My Mind. From the opening chord, you could feel the difference. His voice wasn't just performing, it was remembering. Every line sounded like an apology wrapped in melody. Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. The audience swayed, some smiling, some crying. But Elvis didn't take his eyes off her. Priscilla's gaze never left the stage. Charlie Hodge, standing at the side, whispered to Joe, He's not singing to them tonight. He's singing to her. At the bridge of the song, his voice cracked. The note trembled, almost broke. The crowd gasped. It wasn't like him to falter. But instead of hiding it, Elvis stepped back from the mic, closed his eyes, and whispered, Sorry, y'all. He looked up again, straight at the balcony. Then, for the first time in years, he smiled, not the stage smile, not the rehearsed one. The real one. The band hesitated, waiting for him to come back in. But he didn't. The next line died on his lips. The music softened, then faded. The arena went completely silent. Every flash stopped. Every cough, every rustle disappeared. The silence was louder than any song he'd ever sung. Elvis took a step forward, gripping the mic stand with both hands. His breathing echoed through the speakers. He whispered, "You were always on my mind." And then he just stopped. No one dared to clap. For 20 whole seconds, the world held its breath. The man who had sung for presidents, for millions, for history itself, was standing still under one spotlight, looking at the woman who had once known him better than anyone else on earth. That moment didn't feel rehearsed. Felt human, raw, exposed. Some say a fan in the balcony wiped her tears and whispered, "He still loves her." Others say Priscilla looked down, nodded once, and smiled. But the truth? Only the two of them knew what passed between their eyes that night. The king had stopped mid-song for her. And for the first time in years, he didn't look like a legend. He looked like a man trying to find his way home. Would you have done the same? If the one who once broke your heart suddenly walked through your door? The crowd didn't know what to do. 20,000 people, frozen mid-cheer, watching their idol stand motionless beneath the spotlight. The band's instruments hung in the air, strings still vibrating softly. The conductor's baton hovered, uncertain. Even the stage lights seemed to dim themselves, as if they, too, were holding their breath. Elvis didn't move. His chest rose and fell slowly. His eyes stayed fixed on that balcony seat. In that silence, time seemed to bend. You could hear the hum of the amplifiers, the faint click of a camera shutter. Then she stood up. Priscilla rose gracefully from her seat, every head in the balcony turning to follow. She didn't wave. She didn't smile for the cameras. She just looked at him. Their eyes locked across the arena. 1 second, 2, maybe 3. But to everyone watching, it felt like forever. And then, without a microphone, she mouthed something. No one in the audience could hear it. But those close enough said it was 4 words. "I'm still proud of you." Elvis's hand trembled around the mic. His lips parted, but no words came. He blinked once, exhaled, and whispered just loud enough for the front row to hear, "That's all I needed." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't dare. They just stood, some crying, some smiling, all completely silent. Then he turned back to the band, nodded once. The drummer wiped his eyes and started again. The horns came in soft, the strings swelling like a tide returning to shore. Elvis picked up the line where he'd left off, voice shaky at first, then strong. Stronger than before. He didn't just sing "Always on My Mind." He lived it. Every syllable sounded like a memory being healed. And when he hit the final note, his voice cracked again. But this time, the crowd erupted. The sound rolled through the Hilton like thunder. It was as if 20,000 people were thanking him for being human. He bowed deeply, hand on his heart. Then, with a faint smile, he whispered into the mic, "Thank you. Thank you very much." Cameras flashed, capturing a moment that felt almost sacred. Backstage, Charlie wiped his face. "You okay, boss?" Elvis nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am now." For the first time in years, the stage didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place to let go. But what no one realized that night was that someone had recorded it. A small reel-to-reel tape hidden near the sound booth had caught everything. The pause, the silence, the whisper. And that tape would soon become one of the most haunting pieces of Elvis history ever passed between fans. Because when the king fell silent, the world listened. Have you ever seen a moment so quiet it said more than words ever could? The next morning, the sun rose over Las Vegas like nothing had happened. But for the fans who'd been there, the night before didn't feel real. It felt like a dream, one that still hummed in their bones. By noon, stories began to spread. Hotel employees whispered in the hallways. Waitresses replayed it in break rooms. And every fan club phone in the city rang non-stop. He stopped singing. She stood up. He said something soft. No one could agree on what exactly they'd witnessed, but everyone agreed on one thing. It was the most human they had ever seen Elvis Presley. 2 days later, the first bootleg recording appeared. A sound technician named Ray Michaels had secretly left a reel-to-reel running in the audio booth. He hadn't meant to capture history, he'd only been testing levels. But the tape caught everything. The music, the pause, and that single whisper. The audio hissed softly like static, but the voice was unmistakable. "I lost her once. I won't lose the chance to thank her." Fans traded the tape in secret. Some said they cried the first time they heard. Others claimed it didn't sound like a performance at all. It sounded like a prayer. Radio DJs started talking about the silent song. Newspapers picked it up. One headline from the Las Vegas Review-Journal read, "Elvis waits for her." Hilton crowd left breathless. Within days, the story was everywhere. People who hadn't cared about Elvis in years were suddenly watching that show on repeat in their minds, desperate for details. In Memphis, a group of fans gathered outside Graceland, holding candles. They played the recording on a small speaker, letting it echo through the gates. A young woman whispered, "He didn't sing to the world that night. He sang to her." Back in Beverly Hills, Priscilla stayed silent. No interviews, no comments, not even a denial. But a week later, a close friend said she'd been moved to tears. She'd written something down the morning after, folded it, and mailed it to Memphis. The envelope arrived 2 weeks later. Inside, one short note. "You gave them music. You gave me peace." Elvis kept that letter inside his Bible. Joe Esposito later said he'd sometimes find him reading it before shows, the corner of the page marked by a worn crease. That whisper, caught by accident, became one of the most traded bootlegs in Elvis history. Not because of the song, but because of what it revealed. That even legends carry unfinished stories in their hearts. By summer, that moment had its own name among fans. The Night He Waited. And it didn't just move audiences. It changed Elvis. After that show, he performed differently. Softer. More honest. When he sang "Can't Help Falling in Love" at the end of each concert, it wasn't just a goodbye. It was a promise. "Some things," he told Charlie Hodge one night, "you don't get over. You just learn to sing through 'em." And that's exactly what he did. Even today, you can still find echoes of that whisper floating across old vinyl collectors' forums and fan meetups. Some claim they can hear it clearer than ever on remastered recordings. It's not just a sound. It's a memory frozen in time. Because sometimes, a whisper can travel farther than a song. Would you have thanked someone if you knew it would be the last time you'd ever see them? Months passed, but that night at the Hilton refused to fade. Even after new tours, new songs, new headlines, people still talked about it. The night the king stopped the music. The night love walked back into the room. Everywhere he went, fans brought it up. Some handed him cassette copies of the recording, asking him to sign them. Others simply whispered, "We were there." And every time, Elvis would smile politely, but his eyes would drift somewhere far away. In August of that year, during rehearsals in Memphis, Joe Esposito saw something unusual. Elvis was sitting alone on the piano bench, a folded letter beside him. Joe recognized the handwriting immediately. "You still keep that?" he asked. Elvis nodded. "Some things you don't throw away." He slipped the letter back into his Bible, the same one he carried from tour to tour, tucked behind the page of Psalms. That Bible would later be found at Graceland, the letter still inside, the ink slightly faded but the lipstick mark untouched. Years later, during a private auction, one of the Hilton sound engineers displayed the original reel-to-reel tape. The label was handwritten, "LV April 10th, 74, show number 17, pause." Fans called it the heartbeat tape. Collectors fought over it, but one anonymous buyer returned it to Graceland, refusing to reveal their name. Attached to the case was a note that read, "It belongs where it began." That gesture reignited the story. Documentaries replayed the silence, frame by frame. Interviews resurfaced with fans who had attended. An old woman named Lydia, who had sat 2 rows from the front, said she'd never forgotten the sound of the crowd's hush. "It wasn't silence," she said. "It was understanding." By the early 2000s, a small bronze plaque appeared backstage at the Hilton, just below the left curtain where Elvis had once stood frozen. It read, April 10th, 1974. The night he waited for her. Visitors still pause there, some touching the plaque like a relic. Others just stand quietly, eyes closed, imagining the echo of his voice. Even Priscilla acknowledged it years later in a brief interview. She didn't confirm everything, but she smiled faintly and said, that night, he sang the truth. It wasn't just a concert anymore. It was part of their story, woven into the fabric of who they were. Two people who had loved, lost, and somehow found grace under the blinding lights of fame. And though Elvis would only live 3 more years, fans said something in him changed after that show. He seemed lighter, calmer, as if some unspoken weight had finally been lifted. Every legend has its turning point. That night was his, because even kings need forgiveness. Even stars need one quiet moment to feel human again. If you stood in his shoes, watched your past walk into the room, would you have sung? Or would you have fallen silent too? Years later, the story still echoes, passed through generations like a secret that refuses to fade. People don't just remember the songs he sang that night. They remember the silence. Because in that silence, something eternal happened. Elvis Presley had sung in front of kings, presidents, and oceans of fans. But that night, in the Las Vegas Hilton, he sang for one person. And that choice, simple, human, honest, silenced 20,000 people more completely than any encore ever could. It wasn't about the fame. It wasn't about the lights or the cameras or the crowd. It was about a man finally facing the ghost that had followed him through every song he'd ever written. When Priscilla stood up that night, she didn't just acknowledge a performance. She forgave him, without words, without applause, without the world watching. And for the first time, Elvis let his guard fall in front of everyone. The king showed his heart. After his passing in 1977, that moment took on new meaning. It became more than a concert story, it became a kind of legend. A reminder that even at the height of power, love still commands the final bow. Tour guides at Graceland still whisper it during late-night tours. He waited for her before he sang. Visitors stop, some pressing their palms to the glass of his old dressing room display, where a framed note sits under soft light. The same note she once wrote. You gave them music. You gave me peace. Every year, a quiet fan club holds a small vigil at the Hilton site, now remodeled, renamed, but they always gather at that same stage door. No microphones, no music, just a moment of silence. Because that's how you honor a man who once taught the world that silence can be louder than any song. Elvis used to say, truth doesn't need to shout. And maybe that's the real legacy of that night. Not the chart-topping hits or the rhinestones or the sold-out tours, but a single act of stillness that told the truth about love, regret, and redemption. If you've ever lost someone you loved, you know that moment when words fail, when all that's left is presence. That's what Elvis gave her that night, and that's what she gave back. In the end, the microphone fell silent. But love didn't. Maybe that's why the crowd didn't cheer right away. They felt it too. Something sacred had just happened, and no one wanted to break the spell. Because the greatest performances aren't about noise, they're about truth. And that night, the king of rock and roll told the truest story of his life, without ever needing to finish the song. If the story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because sometimes, forgiveness doesn't come in words, it comes in silence. And in that silence, hearts finally understand what love was trying to say all along.